like to thank the folks at the World Fusion Network for hosting us every 2 weeks here. And I'm really excited today having with me Raven Nabulsi, who has been a very important member of our team for about a decade and has been very involved with the CSETI expeditions, and is the person that many of you may have heard about has taken some of the extraordinary photographs in the last 12 months or so on these expeditions in the last year or two. And I'd like to say she's also an amazing acupuncturist and Chinese medical healer, and she lives in Orange County, California. And her husband is Todd Goldenbaum, who's been the administrator for the OrionProject.org website since its inception in 2008. So thank you, Raven, for all that you've done and for being here.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I think one of the things I'd like to sort of introduce the topic is really about how over the last few years there has been this rapid ascendancy arc of contact and in all the ways that it's happening, which I believe is showing the way to the fact that when mass consciousness begins to turn and acknowledge a reality, it builds its own positive feedback loop and becomes its own force, and momentum is built. And that's exactly what we're seeing globally with CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence.org, CSETI.org, and also with DisclosureProject.org around the world. And I think in particular there are certain areas and manifestations of contact that are really unique, that have begun to unfold up to and including some events that happened with a mass consciousness event we just had in Arizona, in the southern Arizona desert near Rio Rico, Arizona, about 2 weeks ago. And I think that, in fact, it was 2 weeks ago tonight, that a couple of the most extraordinary photographs ever taken of transdimensional extraterrestrial vehicles kind of tearing through the fabric of space-time and emerging into space right above the group occurred. So these are soon going to be up at the CSETI, CSETI.org website, and it's really exciting what's happening. But one of the things I'd like to have, Raven, if you don't mind sharing, is sort of how you got involved and when you got involved with CSETI, and the kinds of experiences you've had that have led up to your having this connection with ETs where you've been able to have these photographs occur.
Sure. I've been involved since November of 1998, and it was my first training. We were in Sedona, and I didn't know what to expect, but I had some experiences in childhood, and a friend actually signed me up to go to the training, and I've been hooked ever since. And I would say just over time, I've been practicing the protocols that you have been teaching us about, and it was about a year ago in, I guess we were in the Outer Banks last year in 2009.
Yeah, in April, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, April of 2009. I had my own personal camera, and I decided to kind of do an experiment and see what would happen if I, asked the ETs to kind of work through my camera. And I don't have a expensive, 20 megapixel camera like a lot of people have, but it was just my, regular Fuji camera, and I decided to make a connection in consciousness with the ETs using the protocols, and then just ask that, if it's possible for them to, come into the photographs I was taking. And so after that, I let it go, and I didn't think about it much, and so I was just walking down the beach in broad daylight, randomly taking pictures, and when I went back and looked at them, I noticed there was a pretty materialized disc in the photograph, which I believe is on the CSETI website now. And there was a second shot I took where you can barely see it, but it had, within a minute, it had moved away at such speed that it was quite amazing. Although at the time I took the photograph, I did not see it, but it was absolutely there when I went back and put it in my computer. So that really got me going. So when we were in Rio Rico last year, I decided to, ask sort of put the same message out there. And again, I got a photograph of it looked like either dematerializing or materializing tetrahedral shaped craft that was right above our circle. And a lot of people had been sensing that and mentioning that they were feeling that sort of a shaped craft was in the area, and then it showed up in my photograph. So that was pretty exciting. And then the big one was in
the pièce de résistance.
Yes, was last year in Joshua Tree in November. Our group was out there, and there were events leading up to this, which I would like to mention that on the day that the photograph was taken, which I believe was November 17th last year, I was in the house. We were staying in with a couple other ladies, and we were kind of talking quietly that morning as there were still other people in the house sleeping, and there was a very distinct male voice that was whispering in the midst of us. And we all kind of looked at each other, and it was, obviously there was no one there. So that kind of started the day off. And so later on that night
if I can mention, at the same time you had that experience, I was upstairs meditating, and
that's right.
I was in this very deep, remote view, sort of hypnagogic state of meditative state of just awakening and going into meditation. And an extraterrestrial life form, clear as a bell, said to me, the Joshua trees transmit star energy. It was the strangest thing, but it was with this very, the tone of the voice was exactly, I'll do it again, the Joshua trees transmit star energy. It was very matter of fact and very sweet, and it was talking about how the Joshua trees in Joshua Tree National Park somehow absorb some sort of energy spectrum from the stars and then transmit like a radio antennas. And if you look at them, they look like little antennae that are on the Joshua tree. And just the strangest thing, but that happened at precisely the same instant that that you and Linda Willis, which many people have heard on this show, and another person who was staying there, heard Dr. Bravo, I believe it was with you.
Yes, it was Jan.
Yeah, Jan Bravo, and heard this sort of whispering voice. So I think it's very important, and it was preceded by about, I don't know, a couple of days earlier, we were in your home county of Orange County, California, when we were in a circle up in this canyon area. I forget the name of it. And we had our group, and it was just a weekend training event, a day long event actually. And we had set up, and right in front of where we were sitting, there was clearly an extraterrestrial voice that broke in almost like a radio transmission about 3 feet in front of us, and we recorded it. It's actually, we have the recording of a couple of the syllables. It was actually 4 or 5 syllables, but for some reason the audio recorder only picked up a couple of them. And so there was this kind of ascending level of intimate right there ET beings. We're not talking a light in the sky. We're not talking, but right amongst us. And right after that happened, there was this object that flashed in the middle of the circle. And I remember there was a woman there named Christine, and near her foot, and then it moved across the circle and flashed in front of someone else. And everyone looking in that area saw it. It was fully manifest light of this light being or object that flashed in the circle. And that was in Orange County a day or two before we started the CSETI expedition up in Joshua Tree National Park, where these events happen in the house. So I just want to sort of like set the stage for what Raven's about to share now. Yeah.
So then, so later that evening, we went out to our field site, and that's the night we had seen that enormous burst of light in the sky. And we were kind of down this trail that's nearby to our circle where we set up. And that itself was astounding. If nothing else had happened, that was already like amazing. That just, it lit up the sky it looked like miles across, this enormous burst of light. And as we were coming back down the trail, I believe you, Steve, had seen like an orb following us down, coming back down the trail.
Correct.
And then
it was about the size of my fist, and it was a soft white orb that and Linda saw it as well, that blipped in and out. It was astonishing.
Mm-hmm. And then we were sort of at the edge of the trailhead, and there were clearly some voices that were heard that were not human, but it sounded like there could have been possibly like 3 or 4 beings of some sort that were making some sort of noise or like a language very close by outside of the edge of our circle. And at that point, I went back to my seat because I knew we were going to start together again, and a lot of people had heard those voices as well. There were at least 50 people there that night, and I'd say at least half the people heard these voices. They were very distinct, but definitely not some people from our group.
Right. In fact, I looked over with my I have these almost 4th generation night scopes, and looked over at exactly the spot where we heard this group of people of some type speaking, and it was just empty space. But everyone heard them. Not everyone, but a lot of people in the group heard it. So there was no question that it was something very anomalous out there in the middle of Joshua Tree National Park. Right.
So I went back to my seat, and Linda Willits was sitting next to me. She had also come back. So we were kind of the only people back in the circle at that point. And we would have been facing pretty much due east. And so I again decided before we all gathered, I would go through my little photographic experiment and just, we were already in this sort of, state of expanded consciousness. I would, ask the ETs if, they could possibly appear in my photographs. That would be great. So I remember I took about 10 photographs, and keep in mind that there were no flashlights on because we have a strict no-light policy out in the field, so we don't ruin our night vision. So there weren't any flashlights or any light sources nearby, and I did not use a flash when I was taking my photographs, but I just had the camera on like a 4-second exposure setting. So I was just taking pictures, and all of them were pitch black because there was, nothing there. And then the last photo I took, I realized that there was some sort of light in the picture, but I thought I'll just look at it later on when we get back because we were getting ready to get started again. So later that night, when I actually put the photos into my computer, that's when I saw there was an actual image of a being floating above one of the chairs across the circle from me. And that, I went nuts because that was just amazing. And there was nobody there, and you could clearly see that the chairs in the photograph were crystal clear. And there was this image of a little male figure, maybe roughly about 4 feet tall, just kind of floating in space above this chair. And I went back there about a month later to photograph the same spot just to make sure, because we never see those the field site during the day. So I went back and took photos to make sure there was nothing back there, and I had people simulate what it might look like in the rare chance that somebody was standing there with the flashlight, but there was nobody there. I knew that much, but just to kind of sway anybody's doubts, I wanted to make sure I had enough information to present just to make so people would realize that there wasn't anything there that could have possibly made that, but there was a very bright light source, which we believe was the orb that Steve saw, creating this almost like a radiating light so this being could show up.
Exactly. Right. And in fact, it's I've described it as, and you can go to cseti.org, cseti.org, and see this picture. It is, I believe, the most important photograph ever taken in the 60-plus year history of the modern era of UFO and ET events, because it's not just of an object or a craft. It is of a person, and it's clearly not human, but it's a humanoid. And it was there, and to describe this, the best I can describe it is when you start getting into trans-dimensional electronic systems, which is what you're dealing with when you're traveling faster than the speed of light across the galaxies and across the star systems, is that it's this orb-like object, which is clearly in the photograph that no human was making, clearly no human was making. It's sort of projecting a cone of light that illuminated in an instant. I mean, this had to be very quick because you were holding the camera without a tripod with the shutter open for 3 or 4 seconds.
Right.
And it had to flash in very quickly, and this is what we often see when we're out there. We'll see these brilliant bursts of light very close to us, and this is what it is. It is an extraterrestrial transport system, if you want to look at it that way, that is what I've likened to electronic astral projection. So it's as if you were to take the astral body, or in this sense, the physical body, and raise its frequency to the level of something beyond the speed of light, and be able to move it across space-time transdimensionally through this kind of electronic system. And that's what these things are. It is not your grandfather's space shuttle or Oldsmobile or anything else for that matter. And the fact that we had heard these ETs, and it was interestingly, when people first heard it, most people heard female voices, but I clearly said to everyone, I hear a male voice. And this is a photograph of the male. No question. And interestingly, you know, there is this interactive, what we call a close encounter of the fifth kind, which is a term that I coined back in 1990 to describe when humans ask the ETs to appear in a peaceful manner for a interplanetary, diplomatic, conscious purpose. And they do, in fact, respond. That when the ETs respond in that setting, and there are a whole set of protocols, which we'll talk about in a moment, for those of you who are new to the show, that deal with higher states of consciousness, remote viewing, and being able to vector or zoom in a craft from space or from wherever it's located. But that, you know, in your case, Raven, you were asking the ETs, and it started about 6 or 8 months before at the Outer Banks in North Carolina, to ask the ETs to connect with you and with your sort of camera, that your neurological physical system as you're pushing the button for the, and this ET clearly is floating above the chairs just outside the circle, turns at his waist and chest, and is looking straight at the camera, at you. And right. This is not an accident. I mean, this is not a coincidence by any means. I mean, it's almost like he has come in and is posing and has this slight enigmatic smile on his face. And on the top of his head is something that almost looks like a yarmulke, but it's a thick sort of disc-shaped thing that I'm convinced is part of the electronic transportation, if you wish, electronic astral projection system that extraterrestrial civilizations use in conjunction with their spacecraft to come into very close proximity. And now, of course, some people say, well, why don't they just flat out materialize fully in the flesh and blood right there? I always point out that, number one, it's risky. Number two, not necessarily all 40 people who were at this event were ready for something like that. And number three, we really are not in a position to question why they manifest the way they do, but we just have to be open-minded and creative enough to understand that we're dealing with a lot of very advanced civilizations, plural, whose technologies are 10 to the 6th, 10 to the 7th, 100,000 to millions of years more advanced than we are right now, and who have this ability to manifest very close to a group of people. Now, what's significant about this is that it was an interplanetary close encounter of the fifth kind. It was an ambassador from their system interacting with our team in the middle of 800,000 acres of wilderness in Joshua Tree National Park. And that is absolutely, frankly, frickin' mind-blowing and amazing. And when you look at this picture on a high-definition TV, we're getting ready to make a new DVD and disc with a lot of these new events that have happened, because since the book, we have a new book that came out about a year ago, in fact a year ago this week, called Contact Countdown to Transformation, that has with it a free DVD that has a lot of the images of the craft and objects that we've seen over the years and the tones, and you can get that at disclosureproject.org. But in the last 12 months, literally, there is so much new material, including this ET, who subsequently informed us through a whole lot of remote view and electronic interface that he was actually from the Andromeda Galaxy.
Right.
And that his name, I was told, was Bijou, like that. And that, in fact, once we realized you had this picture, we went out the night that we all kind of saw it, a couple of days later after you'd had a chance to review it, and we measured everything to get exactly where this happened. And we were there with all our electronics, and I remember when a member of our team, Emery, had all these digital magnetometers and other things, and we were asking questions such as, we're getting information, remote view through consciousness, that you're from the Andromeda Galaxy, and they would go off the scale. And then as the energy gathered, we had a digital thermometer out there, and we're out in the open desert at this high plane at 4,000 or 5,000 feet out in the open desert. It had been about 36 degrees. It was quite chilly. And then we looked, and we all started feeling warm, almost like we had to take our jackets off. And the digital thermometer had gone from 36 degrees to 69 degrees. As we were having this continuing contact with this species and with this particular ET, as he was giving us the information about the fact that he wasn't even from this galaxy. Now, those of you who need a refresher course in astronomy, a solar system is our sun, which is our star, and our 8 or 9 planets, if you count Pluto, which they don't anymore. And the Earth is the third planet from the star, the sun. Now, our solar system is one of billions of star systems in the Milky Way galaxy, which is about 100,000 light years across. That's the distance a beam of light would travel going 186,000 miles a second for 100,000 years. It's a huge distance in space. Now, the Andromeda Galaxy is the twin galaxy to the Milky Way. Okay, the Milky Way galaxy being our home galaxy that has our solar system in it, that's 100,000 light years across. But 2.5 million light years away is the Andromeda Galaxy, which is one of billions of galaxies. Now, the Andromeda Galaxy is very similar. It's a spiral galaxy like the Milky Way, very similar size. In fact, we're coming closer to each other. At some point in the remote future, we'll actually collide or combine these two galaxies. But what's interesting is that this ET being from an Andromeda Galaxy, which is what he clearly told us, and our electronic magnetometers went off the scale, our electronic laser detectors, the digital thermometer, everything was confirming this as we were getting this information and articulating it. It's a very interactive process. You have to remember that at the speed of light, 186,000 miles every second, that's the speed of light, that it would take 2.5 million years to get to the Andromeda Galaxy. So what we're dealing with here are extraterrestrial vehicles and communication systems and teleportation systems that are trans-dimensional, that go beyond the speed of light, because you cannot, no one lives 2.5 million years to go, even if you could travel at the speed of light. So you're dealing with a whole new paradigm of physics and energy and propulsion and communication. And guess what? When you go into these trans-dimensional energy fields, you are now going into the domain of the so-called, what the mystics would call the etheric, the astral, the thought realm, the consciousness realm. And that's why on the World Puja Network we talk so much about this, because everyone listening is very aware of the Vedas and the higher states of consciousness and meditative states. And you really, if you understand that, what's within each of us, this conscious universe that's within every human being and every sentient being in the cosmos, you can begin to understand the kind of technology that would permit a civilization to go from Andromeda, 2.5 million light years from Earth, to our star system, and appear in a circle and have Raven Nabulsi photograph him as he's hovering and sort of waving. His hand is up in the air, his left hand, as he's turning towards the camera with an enigmatic smile on his face. This is absolutely the most astonishing photograph and event that I have ever seen and heard of in the last 50 or 60 years of UFO, modern UFO events. And this is the kind of ascendancy that I wanted to talk about, because, frankly, those of you who are interested, we're going to be at Joshua Tree National Park November 7th through the 13th. That's this November 7th through the 13th. And those of you who want to join us, please go to cseti.org and contact our webmaster and our coordinator there, Debbie Foch, F-O-C-H, and she will get you enrolled. But the point is that we're going to be back there in about, well, now it's less than a month. This is 3.5, 4 weeks from now, and so it's very exciting because this is the kind of event, whether it's the ET's voices being recorded digitally, this photograph that Raven you took, the kind of objects that we're photographing that are craft and transdimensional objects. It's this ascendancy, and it is also, I have to point out that in 2007, not quite 3 years ago, and then particularly in 2008, we had this amazing lock-on from an interstellar system out in the sector of Orion and Sirius, that we had our electronic devices go off initially for 23 minutes without a break in 2007. That was facilitated in consciousness, but had this manifestation electronically, and everyone could see the energy that was coming out of this sphere of rose quartz I was holding in my hand as I held it up to the sky. And when I locked onto Orion, there was an unbroken transdimensional energy that was facilitated with the crystal and with my consciousness that came in and out of my left hand into these electronic detectors. And then a year later, in 2008, we had over 2 hours unbroken of these electronic downloads, which are actually had a sort of rhythm to them that I attempted to translate in consciousness, and which is in the new book, Contact Countdown to Transformation, that I mentioned a moment ago. That's at disclosureproject.org, where I tried to get the feeling of what they were saying, because there is a message in them, and it's very abstract, and it's not like channeling. It's more like going into an abstract state of consciousness and feeling and seeing and sensing what they're saying, or what the energy field is that's coming in. It's very abstract, but I tried to translate it as best I can, and it's in, I think, one of the last chapters of that book, Contact Countdown to Transformation, that has this really amazing DVD that comes with it. Unfortunately, that DVD does not have this picture of this ET being, which we hope to have a new one here in the next few months. We have some people who are volunteers working on it. And this photograph, as well as the one from Rio Rico that happened last year in the Outer Banks, but also the photographs that were obtained this year at the Outer Banks, and also at Rio Rico and Mount Shasta and other places will be in there as well. So we're working on that. But I think that the main message here is that the way that you, Raven, got these photos is the consciousness contact. Ask the ETs to cooperate and to kind of utilize your camera, but also linked up with your awareness. And it's being in that kind of flow consciousness, that state of consciousness that facilitates this kind of contact. And people all over the world are having this happen, even as we speak.
Right, and the thing is too that I never saw anything when I was taking the photographs. It just happened to be on this one afterwards that I noticed there was a light in the picture, but I wasn't like seeing something and then aiming and shooting. It was just, all I can describe it as is your body becomes almost sort of tingly and you feel kind of floaty, and you're operating. It's sort of like when like a second nature thing. When you're driving to a place you've gone to over and over again, your body just kind of knows how to get you there, and you're using your mind to reach the location, but you kind of know where to make the turns, even if you're focusing on talking to somebody or whatever when you're driving. And it's sort of maybe a poor example, but kind of what happens when this happens to me and I take the pictures. It's like I'm sort of doing this second nature thing consciously, and then I'm just letting the camera do whatever happens, and I'm not attached to any of it. If it happens, fantastic. But the whole idea is that we're here to make contact and to invite our star visitors and make that connection. And I think it's just fantastic that they responded, and I was glad to be in service for that.
Right, and that's the other thing is in the spirit of being in service, in sort of a egoless way. It's not that you don't have your individuality and personality there, you do, but it's allowing things to come through us and to do something that's really amazing, not only for ourselves, but for the planet, because what we're really doing, when you kind of boil it down, is that we're pioneering a morphogenic field that is building this bridge between human Earth civilization and these extraterrestrial civilizations, some of which have been watching us for thousands and I dare say millions of years, since the time of Lemuria and Mu and Atlantis and ancient civilizations for which we have no official record for, but which we do have records that have been suppressed. In fact, there's a top secret scientist that we've worked with that is periodically brought artifacts from those ancient civilizations that had contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, and he's asked by the intelligence community to figure out how these devices might have been used and how they worked. And this is true. I mean, this is a person that Dr. Bravo and myself and Dr. Loader and Debbie Foch and other senior people on our team have met with and spent a great deal of time with, and he is a currently very highly classified scientist who works for secret projects. And, the reality is that these civilizations have been around a very long time, but the difference about then and now is that we're coming into a whole new era. Everyone knows talks about 2012, but really we have a whole era of human civilization ending and a new one opening that is intended to exist for 500,000 years of unbroken enlightenment and peace on this planet. It truly is the age of enlightenment, and these civilizations know that. And it's not just an Earth event. It is a cosmic and universal event. And so when we're out there in Joshua Tree, like we're going to be from November 7th to 13th of this year, and when we were there last year, when Bijou, this ET from Andromeda, showed up that you photographed, this is actually just an indication of the kind of opening that's happening. And speaking of openings, I have to say, and we hope to have this up on the website soon. We've just haven't even caught our breath from coming back from Arizona less than 2 weeks ago. But when we were out there that last night, Emery, again, had a digital camera, and I had been talking about something right straight above us. In fact, I'd seen that in the meditation that night. And he took a photograph, more than one, and two in particular, where it really looks like, when you look at it closely, that time-space is opening up, and there's almost like this, there weren't any clouds, but there's this lit object creating this almost like fog around it as it's emerging into linear space-time from another dimension. And it is gorgeous. It's stunning. It's beautiful. And it was right above us the last night. And there we were out there with, 150 or 200 people sitting out under the stars on this roof terrace in southern Arizona 2 weeks ago tonight, in fact. And it was a totally stunning series of photographs. And this is what is accelerating, because the veil, as I tell people, is getting very thin. The time is very short. And everyone knows this. In their bones, they feel it, that the time of the sort of silly season of stupidity of how humans have lived on this planet, fighting over dross and dreck and garbage, is going to close. And there's another whole chapter opening, and they're happening at the same time. While the one is collapsing, the other one is unfolding, and that's how it always happens. And so what we're doing with CSETI is teaching people the Vedas and doing the pujas and initiating into higher states of consciousness at these trainings. And by the way, I have to say, every one of these trainings, I didn't used to do this because, I was concerned people would take it the wrong way, but I just said, oh, the hell with it. And now on these expeditions, like at Joshua Tree, we're going to do at least one and maybe two of these ancient Sanskrit Vedic pujas together as a group as we go into these deep states of meditation and connect through consciousness into this ability to remote view and see these extraterrestrial civilizations and then vector them, just like a jet is vectored into John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, onto the site where we're located and be in a state of universal mind but also universal peace. And we do this with the whole group doing this group meditation together, and it creates an unspeakably powerful state of energy and consciousness that really does open up human civilization to these visitors, because this is what they're waiting for. They're not, everyone says, well, it's this corny thing. It's like when Larry King asked me, well, gee, why don't they land on the White House lawn and just, walk up and, and shake hands with the president? And I'm going, well, why would they? And which president? At that time it was Bill Clinton. I have nothing against Bill Clinton. But, first of all, they'd be blown out of the skies with missile batteries if they did this that are surrounding Washington. And then secondly, they're really looking to interface with people who understand trans-dimensional reality and how these civilizations are interfacing with consciousness and spirit and mind, because that is the big sort of lesson of this that is missed by people who are obsessed with kicking the tires on a UFO. And I think that obviously we have some amazing photographs of ETs, craft that are materialized, like your one at the Outer Banks, broad daylight. But at the same time, the real message is about the state of consciousness and the sort of the state of our own being, but of the state of the world that we're headed towards, which is a world of enlightenment and higher states of consciousness and an unbroken cycle of peace. And if the last yuga has been marked by periods of enlightenment, which are quickly followed by decay and chaos, this next cycle is going to be marked by an unbroken period of universal peace, not just Earth, but the entire cosmos, and enlightenment on this planet, where we're going to live not only peacefully in terms of wars ending, but in a state of amazing technology and consciousness and conscious technologies, because the big science of the next millennium is the science of consciousness, and that's a key part of what we teach at these trainings and expeditions, and that's why I believe these ET vehicles and beings are doing what they're doing because we have more and more people who are entering into that understanding and reaching a sort of state of coherence. And that's the requisite state to be in for this big change to happen and for humanity to not only live together peacefully on this planet, but to go out amongst the stars peacefully. Because if we stay in the consciousness of separation and division, we're going to take that consciousness into space with us, and this is not permitted.
Right.
It just isn't. And this is something that when I meet with people at the CIA and the Department of Defense and NASA and what have you, I say, look, the entry ticket to going out into space is a peaceful civilization. It's not going out there with Star Wars weapons. It's not going out there with this consciousness of us versus them, and let's, as Will Smith said in the movie Independence Day, let's kick alien butt. This is not what it's about, and there's no possibility of progress on the timeline we're on past a certain point without humans realizing that peace really originates within ourselves, and then we manifest it in the world, in how we live, and even how our technologies are. I mean, the technologies we have today, fossil fuels, nuclear power with all the radioactive, life-destroying stuff, is a reflection of the state of the consciousness. And that these new technologies, which we're working on at the OrionProject.org, and I might mention that Raven is on the board of directors of the OrionProject.org, that in reality, these new technologies are a corollary to the state of consciousness that's nonviolent, peaceful, and that is this integrative state and transdimensional state that not only in consciousness, but the actual physical propulsion and physical electricity generating systems as a corollary arise from that understanding, as opposed to digging coal up out of the ground and burning it, destroying the atmosphere and the land and people's lives as you do so. So this is really the key thing for people to understand, is that on the one hand, it is a very physical event that's happening, but it's rooted in consciousness, in a higher state of consciousness.
Absolutely, and it's just I'm just always amazed with each consecutive training that I've been on, and over the years, how the level of contact seems to be ramping up, and with the Orion transmissions in 2007, and then over the last year or so, I'd say we've been definitely getting a lot more recordings of these anomalous voices, and also odd, like strange tones that are almost like these. You can't even describe them because the tone it's not like a human-made electronic device tone. It's something else that's just manifesting from the space around us. And I don't know if you might want to mention something about that, but we've had that happen so frequently in the last few years, and especially at Mount Shasta, where and people could actually see the design of this tone. It was just amazing.
It's incredibly Vedic because it's name and form. Anyone who understands pujas and the ancient sciences of the Vedas understand that form is preceded by tonality. That's what mantras are. Mantras are, and I teach people a very special mantra as part of the meditation training that we do at these retreats, like we're doing at Joshua Tree, November 7th to the 13th. We are teaching people this because the sound component of thought has a vibration that then manifests the astral and etheric light that then manifests the actual object. And we were at Mount Shasta a few years ago, and this is actually on the DVD that your husband, Todd, helped create or did most of the work for this new book, Contact Countdown to Transformation, that people can get at disclosureproject.org. And that on that DVD is a track that has this tone that Raven was mentioning at Mount Shasta. And when that tone emerged out of trans-dimensional space around us, we're sitting out in the National Forest. Now you have to understand this, we're on volcanic soil. We're sitting out there under the stars in the shadow of Mount Shasta, California, where we were just there back in September of this year again. And all of a sudden, we hear this tone that emerges out of the space around us, and virtually everyone there heard this, like 40 people. And in your mind's eye, you could see this sphere that became like this string of spheres, like a string of pearls, and that almost everyone saw the same imagery that was manifested by the tone. It was the E.T. craft in the etheric form, but what we heard, no one saw anything with their naked eye. They saw it in their mental space, okay, in their mental view. But everyone heard with the ears this tone, and we actually recorded it. Now, the recording was with an old tape recorder. It was not very good quality, but that is on this DVD. Now, fast forward to about a month ago, a little over a month ago, between the 4th and the 11th of September, we were up at Mount Shasta again, and we were at this place way up on the mountain, like it's 7,000 feet high, and it was so cold that night up there. It was like 24 degrees. It was one of the coldest nights we've ever had on one of these expeditions. But anyway, everybody they were great troopers, and suddenly, right in front of Dr. Bravo and in front of Emery and myself was this most beautiful chiming tones that were, the best I can describe it would be something pure, crystalline, celestial, musical notes and tones that manifested in the thin air right in front of us, 3 feet in front of us. And we did get a little bit of it on an audio recording. We realize now we need to get much better audio recording equipment than what we've had. But we did get it recorded, and we hope to have that. In fact, next month, in November, on this show, on the World Puja Network, I'm going to have Charlie Baylog, who is a audio engineer and expert and musician, and we're going to have a whole collection of these tones that we're going to play on this show so people can hear, because this has been happening with increasing frequency. And in fact, when we were in France this year and in England, we not only had some amazing tones that we heard and sounds, but we also, again, had an ET voice that was right outside, about 2 feet outside the circle, that clearly spoke during one of the meditations that we also got recorded, at least a few syllables of it. So these are coming from trans-dimensional interstellar space and breaking into linear space-time, where we're sitting out in the middle of a crop circle or out in the middle of a field, or up on Mount Shasta or out in the Joshua Tree National Park, which is this, as I mentioned, 800,000-acre immense desert up in the high desert of California, Southern California. So these things are happening at the same time that we're having fully materialized craft that we're having photographed and videotaped, if you look at the DVD that comes with the book, and then these voices that are speaking that people are hearing, and in a sense, the escalation of this is really rapid if you look at the timeline of human contact. And I have to say that it's had other implications. I can't say where this occurred, but in the last few months, we had an expedition where a G7 country that has been wanting us to set up contact for their Ministry of Defense and their head of state, the head of their country, sent a very senior official, scientist, physicist, as well as a very high military official to one of these expeditions as an observer, and he was astonished with what he saw and heard. And all I'll say is that the report was very favorable, and this has all happened in the last few months. And so it isn't only that we're having these experiences for our contact team, but now we have a major G7. A G7 are the top 7 industrialized economic powers in the world. Country that is, in the last 3 or 4 years, have been actively pursuing learning about this, and now have sent a senior government very senior. When I say very senior, I mean way up there. Someone who would brief the head of state of this country on this issue, to an expedition where he saw and heard these things. So this is it's really, really exciting. And then on top of that, we just got an email today from a member of our team who's in Romania, who was at a retreat with 2,000 meditators, where they were practicing the CSETI meditation protocols, where we use the mantra and go into deep meditation, and then remote view mentally deep space and invite the ETs in. And the kinds of sightings and experiences they had were amazing and beautiful. We just heard of this today. So this isn't just happening with our teams and our training expeditions. This is now global. We have people in Malaysia, in South Africa, in China, in all over North America, Brazil, Argentina, Romania, the Czech Republic, all over Europe, India, Russia, you name it, who are coming to these events and learning to do this and going back and teaching them. And so what's happening is that I think we're at a breakout moment, not only for disclosure of the facts and the truth of this, and with that, I mean, look, you can't acknowledge that these UFOs are real without acknowledging that they're not using Exxon Jet A fuel to get around. I mean, you're not traveling between star systems using a solid rocket booster or a Werner von Braun circa 1942 rocket to go from Andromeda to Earth. It's a whole new physics, a whole new science, and it's a whole new world when this comes out. And that is what is so exciting about what's happening, because it's not just, it's personal, it's conscious, but it's also geopolitical, and now it's become this mass global movement. Recently, we've been contacted by a major world industrialist, who I'm not at liberty to name, that we'll be meeting with in Washington, D.C. in the next couple of weeks, who is really, his whole family is really learning about contact and disclosure, and specifically about the OrionProject.org and these energy systems, because so many people are beginning to realize that we're running out of timeline using a paradigm that was really started in the mid-1800s of burning fossil fuels and burning things to get energy, that this is something that it's time to move on from. And so that is happening thanks to the people at the World Puja Network and others who are meditating with us and praying for this, and also actively working to make this change happen. So it's a dynamic that's really, not that it hasn't had its ups and downs, I'll tell you that, but it's a dynamic that is, I think, unstoppable and very, very exciting. And it's in no small part because of the effect of so many people doing the meditation and doing this in consciousness, creating, as Rupert Sheldrake describes, this morphogenic field effect, sort of this cosmic 100th monkey effect, where when a certain number of people begin to do something together in a unified way, it tilts and pulls with it all of consciousness and all of humanity, and opens up this bridge, this pathway into our future, and creates its own momentum and creates its own reality. And that is exactly why we're continuing to do this, and why we're continuing to train people, because and that's why we're inviting people who can come to Joshua Tree National Park with us. And from November 7th to 13th, again, go to cseti.org, and you can see when it is and what we're doing. But even if you go to disclosureproject.org, you can get the meditation CD, you can get the CD that teaches you how to vector and contact these ET craft, you can get the information. It's all there. We put it all there in very simple, very inexpensive form, because some of the people who have done that, who've never come to one of these one-week events, have done this and had these ET craft show up right in their neighborhoods, or when they've gone out and had expeditions. We have a team up in Montreal, for example, that have gone outside Montreal and have had the most amazing level of contact. In fact, the head of that team is going to be on the World Puja Network with me in the next few months to discuss what the team up in Canada has been experiencing, quite separate from me. I've never been out with them except when I went up there to train them a couple of years ago. So this is what's really exciting to me as the founder of the Disclosure Project and CSETI, is that this is happening now, where people are going out, having these experiences And, you know, I could drop dead, it wouldn't matter because, I mean, not that I want, but it's happening on its own, you know, and because it's created a momentum, an unstoppable force that has now become global.
I'd like to just add one more comment to that. We have a prayer and meditation group with a lot of the members that have come to some of the trainings done by Costa in Northern California. And on October 9th, anybody who wanted to participate, we decided to do our CSETI protocols. And there were locations all over the world that participated. Hundreds of people were involved in this little mini event, and people had amazing experiences, you know, in major cities. And our focus was to ask the ETs, if possible, to somehow allow us to see the CSETI triangle. And a couple of days after we did our worldwide experiment, there was a major sighting over Manhattan, and where there was you know, a triangular shape that appeared, and people, you know, in the city in broad daylight saw it. And then there was another one, I believe it was somewhere in Texas, that happened a day or two later, and the two objects were almost identical. So it's just amazing what, you know, a small group of humans can do together.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's actually very beautiful, and that's the other thing. Once people come to these 1 week expeditions, we plug them into this group that's become this global group of, you know, 200 or 300 people who are doing these sort of experiments and work in consciousness together, and who also, I have to say, provide a lot of protection and support for the work that I'm doing. I mean, if I'm having a critical meeting with someone or doing something that's frankly very dangerous but needs to be done, they're notified, and they do meditation and prayer to protect it. And so people who understand the power of meditation and mind and prayer are invited to be involved with that as well, because it is a very powerful force, and there's no question that it has an effect beyond what we'll ever be able to see and maybe intellectually understand. So, well, we're about out of time. I do want to thank you, Raven, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you've been really such an important member of our team, and we'll be together soon again, of course, up at Joshua Tree National Park. Hooray! We love it there.